Good evening, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the fourth in our series of webinars on rescue medications in severe developmental and epileptic encephalopathies, a series that Deep Connections and LGS Foundation has taken on jointly. I'm Gabi Conacher. I am the president and co-founder of Wishes for Elliot and Deep Connections. And we're so thrilled that all of you are here today with us to build or update your seizure emergency plans. You know, it's been really amazing talking to a lot of different folks in this community who are so well versed in their children and know everything, but it's in their heads. Even, you know, really brilliant people who we talk to, and it's like, this is a great opportunity for us all to get it down on paper and have it available in case of emergencies. So a couple of few quick notes. We're recording today's session. It will be up online within a couple of days. All participants have video off and are muted, but please feel free to use the Q&A and chat boxes if there are things coming up for you, if you need clarifications, if you have questions, if you're looking for a resource that we're talking about and you don't see where to find it, feel free to chime in. So our guide today will be the true and trusty Tracy Dixon-Salazar, who is the Director of Research and Strategy for the LGS Foundation. And she'll kind of walk us through everything. She has lived this inside and out. For those of you that don't know Tracy, she's also a DEE mother. So Tracy, I'll pass it on to you.
Great, thank you guys so much for having me, and I'm excited about this series. I have a 27-year-old daughter who has had severe seizures since she was 2, and we learned about rescue medicines when she was about 5 years old in the back of a cab with a sales rep for Diastat when the drug had just first come out. And so I love that this whole topic is getting attention, this idea of having an action plan in place, having it written down, having it shareable. And so I'm going to be talking about this 4-part series, in which probably many of you have been on. Please, tell your friends about it if you think that it's been important and helpful for you. So let's just jump right in. I want to review, the first 3 parts that we've had so far, and then we're going to jump into developing your own seizure action plan. So let's just do that right now.
And Tracy, sorry to interrupt. I just also want to make sure we thank our sponsors for these webinars, Neurelis and UCB, who have very generously helped us pull these together and bring these to you.
Yes, thank you so much. I appreciate that. All right, here we go. So for part 1 of this series, which was back in June, we heard from 2 experts in the space, Elaine Worrell, who's at Mayo Clinic, and Ann Burke, who is at Lurie Children's. And Ann actually got us kicked off where she really started talking about how common seizure emergencies were in the DEE population and in LGS, which is one of the DEEs, which is the foundation that I work at. So she had some real world data showing that it's pretty common for us to have seizure emergencies. There's a lot of rescue med use that's occurring, and and we really should have an action plan and be prepared. And an action plan was so much more than just filling out a piece of paper. It was really understanding the nuances of your loved one's seizures and what to do in the case of an emergency. And then Dr. Worrell jumped in and started and really gave us a doctor talk of what do we know about rescue medicines? What's the science? What are we doing in medical practice? And she said things like, so many seizures that in a 12-hour period is this many tonic-clonics in a 12-hour period, or a seizure that goes longer than 5 minutes. But the reality is that we know that that's not, it's not a cut and dried with our kids. Like, our kids just don't, sit down and go, okay, I'm going to now have a seizure that's going to last 5 minutes and it's going to follow the textbook. Like, there's nothing textbook about our kids. But Dr. Worrell gave us a really nice, overview. We know that most families don't have a rescue plan in place, and there are all these different seizure types and seizure patterns that have been documented. So if you haven't had a chance to see those, definitely go and take a look. We also learned that there's a lot of different rescue med choices out there. Back when my daughter first started seizing when she was 2, there were no at-home rescue meds, and we spent all of our time in the emergency room. Whenever she would go into status, mostly non-convulsive status for her. And when we learned about rescues, it was great because going to the emergency room for us was always very traumatic. We had another kid and he would get dumped off somewhere, and then there's no ER visit that doesn't end up lasting 9 hours. And then you go to the ER just to argue with doctors who don't know as much about the disease as you do, and they're gonna do it their way, and then they end up messing up your child. So we just try to avoid the ER at all costs. So rescue meds were great. But now there are more options than just rectal, diastat or rectal diazepam. There are intranasal options, intranasal midazolam, intranasal diazepam, and there are other options that are coming down the pipe that are FDA approved for clusters of seizures, repetitive seizures that are occurring in a block, or for status. There's also a dissolvable strip that's coming out, and then there's all sorts of other things that we use that might not be FDA approved per se for rescue meds, but a lot of people give oral Klonopin or Klonopin dissolvable wafers, or an extra dose of drug at the beginning when they see something coming on. So we learned about a lot of different options out there for types of seizure meds, and so it's really great to have options. That's what we learned about in the first one. And then in the second one, the second webinar, which was in July, we heard from Dr. Ches, who, we love Dr. Worrell's doctor talk, and this is the way it's supposed to be, and this is what science says. And Dr. Ches just told us like it really was in the clinic, right? He's like, yes, it's lovely to think that, a seizure lasting longer than 5 minutes and you intervene with a rescue med. But the reality is you have to know, the pattern of seizures, especially for the really severe kids. They're gonna have a baseline. My daughter, if she would have 2 to 3 tonic-clonics before waking, between like midnight and 7 a.m. And then if she woke up and it was a school day and she had one after waking, or if she started having a lot of twitches, like myoclonic jerks or staring spells, and we knew it was going to be a bad day. And at that point, we started thinking about, well, should we intervene now? Because this is just going to get ugly from here. But that was her special circumstance. You have to really know what your kid's baseline is, your loved one's baseline. And then you really need to individualize not just a seizure emergency plan, which he was really nice to distinguish the difference between that. You have an emergency plan, which is, okay, the poopy has hit the fan. We are in an emergency, we are in a crisis. Like, what is the bare minimum of information that you need to know just to handle this emergency and get your loved one safe? And then a larger seizure action plan, which is everything that you're doing to sort of take care of the seizures, all the medicines you're giving and the dosing, and what you're doing to make sure that you have like a go bag to go to the hospital, which we'll talk about if you're frequently visiting the ER or the hospital, like a bigger plan that isn't necessarily right in the thick of an emergency. And so he really differentiated between the two of those, with the seizure emergency plan, the I-SEP, being page 1 of your larger seizure action plan. He really talked about how you should work with your doctor to talk about this, to come up with what this plan is going to be during an emergency, to agree on it. He gave us 10 tips on how to talk to our doctors and things you should ask them. And if you have a doctor that's just not comfortable dealing with seizure emergency plans and really severe seizures, then you can get a second opinion, especially in this world of telehealth, where you can get on and see an epilepsy specialist, an epileptologist, and really nail down your seizure emergency plan, and then still go back and work with your regular doctor, but you've had like an expert weigh in on it. So Dr. Ches really told us how it was and practically what he sees in the clinic. He gave lots of examples, in addition to, saying, yeah, it's not all as cut and dried as the science would like to tell us. In the third webinar, which was just a few weeks ago, we then went from, hey, here's what we know about research, to, hey, here's what really happens in the clinic, to listening to actual caregivers of DEE families who tell us what really happens at home with these seizure emergencies, right? And I think what really stood out in that panel was that that there was a diversity of experiences, and every one of them was so individualized. From one person who presented of where every seizure emergency was life-threatening and they had to provide oxygen, right, a pumping mask, and regularly went to the hospital, and just very, very severe, to others who didn't have very many rescue med and rescue emergency instances where they used like a rescue medication or a rescue intervention, but they had enough of them, right? They weren't having them, every week. I mean, my daughter at her worst was getting diastat 3 to 4 times a week for non-convulsive status mostly. And if that didn't work, then we'd go to the ER and we would just argue and be obnoxious until they gave her more Ativan. Don't give her anything else. Don't No, nothing else, just Ativan. It will stop it. And if the Ativan doesn't stop it, nothing's going to work because we've already done that. And then it would put her into a coma. And so that was kind of our life for years. That was her, you know, her baseline for rescue med use. But there are others that maybe use it 3 or 4 times a year. So it's very, very individualized, but lots of good advice, many perspectives, lots of good advice. If you didn't watch that webinar, I highly recommend you go watch it. And all of these caregivers really said that they had to learn things the hard way and that they really had to figure this out for themselves, right? There was nobody really that sat them down and gave them a 4-part webinar series on how to do this. And even a 4-part webinar series isn't perfect. Hopefully we can all get our seizure emergency plans in place with this webinar, but that's just one piece of the puzzle. And even then, getting just the emergency plan can be challenging for so many of us. And then what we also learned is a lot of the families have their plans and they know what they are, and it's more of a gut instinct, but it's not written down anywhere, and they might not have shared it with anybody, right? So I know what to do in emergency, but does my husband or you know, or the other caregivers in your life, do the nurses know? Is it written down somewhere where you can just, you know, sort of hand the information to a paramedic if they come into your house? We've had so many paramedics that, and they all ask you the same question: what meds are they on? What are they allergic to? And it's like, here, just take this piece of paper because I'm tired of repeating myself. And then we go to the ER and we get the same thing. I'm tired of repeating myself. But, you know, so we learned that it often wasn't written down. And so we're just hoping that part 4, while it's not going to be, it's only one little piece, it's a huge piece for all of us stepping in the right direction and you know, really talking to our doctors about these things, taking this advice that we heard from webinars 1, 2, and 3, and then really getting a plan written down. And in theory, a seizure emergency plan, which we're going to talk about next, shouldn't change. It should be independent of the place that the person is at, right? It's like there's a certain point where they meet a threshold to either get a rescue med or get some other intervention, maybe a VNS magnet swipe or something else, and then that escalates to go into the emergency room, and that might escalate, you know, beyond that, or it might stop. But you know, there might be policies in place, like if you're at the school and the school's administering it, they might have different processes in place, but it still shouldn't change when a rescue med is given. It might change the steps a little bit, like, oh, it has to, you know, we have to call mom and dad first and only this person can give it, but it shouldn't change like the when. So with that, you know, we're now up at part 4, and, you know, how do we make an individualized seizure emergency plan for our loved one? So we're not even talk about seizure action plans right now. I think that Deep Connections is going to be moving forward and looking at the bigger seizure action plan, which would have, you know, everything. It wouldn't just list medicines, but list the time of day and how often they get them. And it would list, you know, all sorts of other things, maybe like what was on their MRI, what was on their EEG, like the bigger picture, things that you need to know and should be written down, but also you don't necessarily need to know them right in the case of an emergency when you're in a crisis. So with that, let's just jump in. I'm gonna share with you guys a link to where you can get this document that I'm going to show. So if I open Q&A, can I post here? There's no chat per se. Can you guys still see my screen?
There's no chat yet.
No chat yet, but yeah, you've got it up now. No,
okay.
I do.
So I am going to share this. Can I not share this?
You should be able to. How are you trying to share it?
I just wanted to type it in. Open, answer, dismissed. So I can't give myself my own question. I can't tell myself a question. Can somebody else put it in for me? Like I can't paste anything here.
You're trying to do the address of the...
Yeah, I'm trying to paste in the link to the I-SEP document.
Okay, let me see. Okay. I'm just putting it up. I don't have the Google link, but I can just throw it up there.
I have the link. It's just
Here's the link.
Okay. That's great. Yeah.
It's just huge. I don't know if people are going to be able to type it in. I was hoping that they could just click on it. So here's the link, but I don't know if people can just click. There's a way for them to click on this at all? Or do they have to type it in? Usually there's a chat box and you can kind of just pop it up there. Nobody can put it in as a question?
Hang on, let me see.
Sorry, I guess I can't ask myself a question. I can only answer questions. Only hosted panelists can see the questions, but I can't give myself a question.
Oh, here we
Can everybody access the, I just put it in the chat box. Does everybody have access to that?
There we go. There's the chat box.
Oh, wait. It's to all panelists, Jen. Let me.
Is that to all panelists, that one? Or
all panelists and attendees. I got it. Yay. Okay. So if you're,
there we go.
Hopefully you guys are all more competent than we are. But here you go with the electronics. But if you open the chat, I was able to find it up here under other features. I'm going to start sharing again. But if you can go to the chat, share my screen again. And I'm going to pull up what we hope you guys will be able to open while we're sitting here. If not, that's okay. This is recorded, I hope. We'll go here. So this is a seizure emergency plan that we threw together, but we pulled it together after listening to the 3 webinars and talking to tons of families of DEE parents and caregivers, and what do you really need in an individualized seizure emergency plan. So just a reminder, this is the one page for an emergency. You know, you can think about getting this printed up and then taking it to, you know, printing it out, laminating it, hanging it on your wall. We never laminated ours just because it changed pretty frequently, but we hung it on a clipboard. Gabi, did you want to say something?
Yeah, the link says it requires access. I don't know. Can you do open access to the document?
Yes.
Thanks. Share with the world.
Here's the link. Let me try again. I'm gonna stop sharing because apparently I can use the chat when I'm. All right, how about now?
Yeah, and you need to make sure you follow Tracy's link. The other link did not.
Hopefully that one is working, but let me know if that one's not working. Sorry for the technical difficulties, folks.
Yeah, it says you need access when I click on it. So.
Okay, I'm going to share it right now.
Let's see if I can do. Anyway, why don't you keep talking, Tracy, and we'll figure out how to get, or we can start talking a little bit more about kind of some of the challenges, things to think about as you're filling this out.
All right, anyone with the link should be able to get in there now. Try it again. One more time.
Yes, did it. Yeah, we're in.
All right. Sorry, folks. I've been dealing with LGS all week, so sorry. It's a thing. All right, so let me pull this up. This is the seizure emergency plan. What would be great, so all of you are in here, it'd be great if you did not type in this, but if you wanted to, go to File, and you can make a copy for yourself, and it'll open in a totally new document. You can take notes while we're going on here, or you can download it as a Word document right here. And am I still sharing my screen?
No, you can't see it.
All right. How about now?
Yes.
Okay, so all of us are in this document right now. So what you can do is you can go to File, and you can make a copy. And if you make a copy, it will open up another one that's just yours, and you can edit that one away, rename it anything that you want, like your child's name or your loved one's name. The other thing you can do is you can just download a copy as a Word document, and you can type in it as we're going. This is the master document, so maybe don't type in this one. I'm going to type in this one though. So the way that the document is meant to work is that you're supposed to come into these boxes and type things, but you can use as much room as you want. So you would write the date that you filled this out, and this is really important. We used to update our seizure emergency plan in our house pretty regularly. Every couple of weeks, we would update it when her seizures were changing. Then at a certain point, her seizure emergency started to look very similar, and then we didn't have to keep updating it. But do write down, the date that you're updating this, and also it's really good to review this with your neurologist or your specialist every 3 months as needed. Things can change in the DEEs so frequently. But you're designed to really just come in here and type in, my daughter's name is Savannah, or you can just print this and you can write these things in, but it's meant more to be an interactive form. But you could type in Savannah Salazar, and if you need more room, you would just hit enter, and maybe they have a really long name, or you want to include some other information here. To type in their date of birth, their height, and their weight. And then, you know, parents or guardians, if you need to add more contacts, you can, you know, the third one you want, or if you want to change the way that this is, but this is meant to be a document for you, and it has some suggestions on how you can do things. So for the diagnosis, it's really good to include information about the diagnosis. So you imagine a paramedic or somebody in an emergency going, okay, well, what do they have? And so we used to always write here, intractable epilepsy, Lennox-Gastaut Syndrome, because a lot of paramedics had never heard of Lennox-Gastaut, but they had heard of intractable epilepsy. And then we would put also intellectual disability. So we put intractable epilepsy, Lennox-Gastaut, I'll just do the abbreviation here, moderate intellectual disability. And then I would say, you know, baseline seizures are, you know, 2 to 3 generalized tonic-clonic each morning. And beyond that, you know, if she had others, but that's kind of her baseline. Jen, did you have a question?
Yeah, I hadn't thought of it until you said intellectual disability, but should you also add in there things like nonverbal and?
Yeah, absolutely nonverbal. My daughter is not, but just some things that keep it. I mean, it's really good to keep this brief because you imagine this is an emergency document, but knowing that the person with seizures is nonverbal is really important. But I don't think you have to go into like, in order to communicate with this person, they communicate at a 2-year-old level, which would be what I would write. But nonverbal, I think, is really important. So,
and Tracy, can you make it a little bigger? It's a little bit hard to see.
Yes, I'm so sorry. Yeah, absolutely.
All right.
Better?
For the blind, that's supposed to be blind. Yeah, no, that's great. Thank you.
There we go. And then the gray part is just a suggestion, so you can just delete this when you're done typing in, you know, what it is that you want. So you don't have to keep that there, but it's just a suggestion on how you might do that. And I'm going to just change this back. But this is definitely meant to be an interactive document for you guys to edit and change as you need. For us, for drug allergies, there's a lot of different, you know, allergies. There might be other allergies that they have in addition to drugs. My daughter's allergic to sulfa. She's allergic to some anti-seizure meds, Depakote, Tegretol. She's also allergic to calcium, which is often used as a filler in drugs that are given. And so it's, you know, we always make sure. So, but this is really going to be something that people in an emergency are going to ask you. And then what current meds they're on. And I don't know about you, but, you know, at one point my daughter was on, you know, 7 meds plus rescues, plus a diet, plus a device. And so this gives you a lot of room to type all of that. So med 1, med 2, diet, device, rescue, to put all of that there. And then you can put, you know, for med 1, takes twice a day, you know, takes, you know, 400 milligrams twice a day, something like that. However you would write it. Just make sure that it's clear.
And it might also be good to if put somewhere if your child takes nothing by mouth.
Yeah, exactly. So that would be a really good thing to include, you know, up here. The reason that we made the document this way is because we wanted to make sure that you have the individual amount of room if you needed to include very specific things and go into a lot of detail. I mean, ideally this would be 1 page, but the reality is nothing our kids do fits on 1 page. But the idea for this really is to be, in case of an emergency, what's the basic information? And then you could certainly fill out a much more detailed one after the emergency is over as part of your bigger seizure action plan. But for the emergency, it's like, what is the basic information that you need to know, or your other caregivers need to know, or the paramedics need to know, or the ER hospital staff needs to know in order to treat this seizure emergency. And then you get to the what to do in the event of a seizure emergency. And there's some suggestions here. And we're going to talk about this. We've got 4 people on the call here who who filled out, their seizure emergency plan. They all have kids with severe seizures, and they're going to comment on this. But I'm not going to read everything here, but as you're thinking about writing what to do, possibly before a seizure emergency, a really great example is my daughter always has more seizures when she's about to start her period. So and to go into status when she starts her period. So we're more likely, we have like a preventative medicine where 5 days before she starts her period, we give some extra doses of Klonopin, and then we end that, a few days after her period starts. There are other people who say, listen, my kid usually has 3 tonic-clonic seizures in the morning, but they've now had 5. It's not quite, the status yet, but it's going to get ugly from here. We've seen this before. It's all based on the experience. It's going to get ugly. Can we intervene sort of to prevent the deep emergency that's coming? So there's some things that you can, think about here that are written here. And again, you can just delete this gray text as you write it and take as much room as you need. During the seizure emergency, what do you do? So, how do you differentiate between a cluster of seizures, right? There's a lot of kids that have clusters where the seizures group. It's not one long seizure that goes for 5 minutes. It's a grouping of seizures, but from experience, it's not going to stop. What is a cluster for you? Or what does convulsive status look like, or non-convulsive status? For my daughter, she would always go into a tonic. When she needed a rescue med, she'd go into a tonic-clonic, and the tonic-clonic wouldn't end, but it would taper down into a non-convulsive status where she was kind of jerking and staring and twitching. That could go on for days. So we would intervene on that at the 10-minute mark. So from the time the tonic-clonic started, at the 10-minute mark, give the rescue because she's now in non-convulsive status. But it's going to be different for everybody. And where are the rescue meds? Where are they located? Who can give it? We hear a lot from school nurses that, only nurses can give it, or schools like to say that. But the reality is these are medicines where we as caregivers who have no medical training whatsoever are told we can give it. So if we can give it with a certain amount of, understanding of the instructions, then anybody can give it. So, so it's often, but there's often one person who's designated at the school or somewhere, wherever you might be, to give it. And then after the seizure has ended, briefly write out what you should do. Do you have to watch? I mean, if you give your kid a rescue, you really need to watch their breathing. You need to watch their heart rate, make sure that they don't get too low or they don't stop breathing. And if, we always were updated on our CPR training in case we had to administer, CPR for the heart just slowly. Never happened with a rescue, but it could. And then what do you do to comfort the person who, and the bystanders, like maybe there's siblings around? What do you do to comfort them after this emergency? And then finally, when to call emergency services. Like I said, we avoided the ER and love to avoid the ER at all costs because they don't know what they're doing over there. They don't have as much experience with this disease as we do. So we try never to go there. You may want to go there. You may prefer them taking care of your kid and not doing rescue meds at home. That's totally fine. It's really just what you're comfortable with. But for us, is to keep us out of the emergency room, so disruptive, keep us out of the hospital. And then there's some instructions here at the bottom. And it's always good to put your neurologist and their contact information, your insurance, because those will be the next thing the ambulance people ask you. And it's just good to have it just written down. And this is really it. This is really what we, based on everything that we've heard from other parents, felt like was the most important critical information for the emergency. And it's put together in a way that allows you to use as much space as you need in certain areas, but not in other areas. It's really nice to get one of these plans where you can just write in, but frankly, when our kids are on, 8 medicines and a diet and a device, and they've got 20 allergies and things, we need a form that's more like this so we can fill in. So you could be filling yours in now if you wanted to as we're going. And then what we really wanted to do is do a couple of things. We want to open it up for questions for you guys, but first we want to hear from 4 moms, all of the mamas, because women rule the world, mamas rule the world. Just kidding. I'm teasing. If there are any men on the call, don't take that personally. But 4 moms who may or may not have written down their seizure emergency plan prior to this 4-part webinar series. We won't call anybody out. You know, they read through this, they looked at this, they've listened to the webinars, and we just really want to hear their experiences in thinking about this, because it's so individual. I gave you a lot of examples of what I would write and what we went through, but it's going to be so individual. And the whole purpose of this is, you know, creating a seizure emergency plan is not going to be easy. A lot of us learned it the hard way by trial and error and did it ourselves. But if you want this plan in place, you should really have one. It's probably going to fall to you as the caregiver to make it happen, because doctors are not talking about this as readily as they should be. And we just want to give you a lot of advice and input from other parents who are going to be your best source of information on things to think about when you put this together. And it's probably something that's going to adapt and change over time. You know, for my daughter, her seizure emergency plan changed a lot in the beginning, but then it became stable when she was about 10 or 11. Then she went through puberty and it went crazy again. And then now as an adult, it's pretty consistent. We don't have to update it maybe once a year. So with that, let's go to our moms, and we'll start with you, Kayleigh, if you want to unmute yourself. So Kayleigh, why don't you introduce yourself and, you know, your loved one with seizures, and then tell us what you thought of this seizure emergency plan as you were trying to fill it out for your son.
And Tracy, would you mind just stop sharing? Then we'll be able to see people's pictures a little bit. Perfect. Thanks.
Perfect.
Great. Hi, everyone. My name is Kayleigh. My son, Dylan, is almost 13. Dylan had a stroke in utero, so he had seizures from the moment he was born, all of his life. As he got older, things progressed and just got worse and worse, and we started seeing multiple seizure types, very frequently, sometimes up to 400 seizures a day. So we're very familiar with rescue medications. Thinking about doing the seizure action plan, I'm very consistent with our neurologists. We see them very frequently, and we're constantly talking about updates, especially because we're coming into the teen years and things are changing. But I personally just have not had one written down, and until we did the series, had not really thought about it a lot. I had to sit and think about how I would want somebody else to treat him in the event of an emergency, because I know my child very well, but someone who's not familiar with his quirks may not be comfortable doing some of the things that I do or react the same way I would. So I think going forward, for me, I think I want to sit with my neurologist a little bit more and kind of get what is our bare minimum baseline for someone else who doesn't know him. I don't want anybody to ever second guess themselves in an event of emergency with him. So yeah, I think just putting it down in writing, just very specific to his needs, his individual needs, would make a big difference when he's out in the world and away from me, or in the event something happens to me.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good point. You know, this came up a lot in the previous webinars, like what happens if something happens to you and you're not there, but you're the only one that has that information, right? Or, you know, what happens if the person with seizures is away from you, right? With the DEs away from you, right? And you're incapacitated and you can't be called, or they're just away from you. And then who has this? And then so much of what we do as parents, and this came up a lot, is, you know, based on instinct and our experience, right? And so really thinking about how to write that down, you know, is really important. So that's a really good point. Thanks, Kayleigh. Jennifer, why don't you introduce yourself, and then you can tell us a little bit about how you viewed the I-SEP plan.
I'm Jennifer Griffin. I'm the mother of Theo, who is 18 years old. And Theo also started having seizures in infancy, but he started with infantile spasms. So he wasn't right from the day he was born like Dylan was. Our use of rescue meds is very sporadic. We are not overly familiar with them. And I'm definitely one of those people that it's all in my head. And you just know in your gut when to do something. And that doesn't really help people who don't know Theo as well as I do. So I'm really appreciative of having an emergency plan, because what's the difference between just, the I-SEP and the I-SEP, and when are we going to call it an emergency, and when are we just going to call it a bad day? Or oh, that seizure just really, knocked him flat on his butt, and just just be there with it. His seizures he doesn't have 5-minute seizures. He doesn't have these enormous tonic-clonics that last forever, but he does have non-convulsive status. And it sounds very, very similar to what you said, Tracy. He has, it's often, but not always, on the heels of a big tonic-clonic, and that maybe lasted 30 to 40 seconds. And then, yes, like most kids, he will kind of be conked out, and it'll take him a while to rally. Sometimes it's really instantaneous, and sometimes you start to see that he's now in non-convulsive status. He's not going to get out of this, and it could go for days. Our challenge, I guess it's not necessarily a challenge. It's actually the advice that we've been given by his neurologist is she really hesitates before telling us to give him any kind of a benzo, because she just doesn't like the idea of giving them too frequently, and understandably, because he's not somebody who would get them very often. But Klonopin has been the one that we've used in the past, and other than that, it's really just kind of a wait and see. But I think that it's really important, having listened to all of this, to actually have some sort of a concrete plan, and we can, at least it's a baseline, and then we can have all of these exceptions, but at least as long as I am included in the conversation. So if the school is calling me, or if there's somebody watching him that isn't as familiar with him, then always bring me into the conversation so that I can have some input. And I always want to be called before 911 would be called, like call me if he's a minute into a seizure, that kind of thing. Right. And I like this because even though the school will have their own plan, this can be attached to it. Something like this can be attached to it, and it starts that conversation, especially if there's maybe a substitute teacher or aide that day.
That's great. The form was, as you all know, it was designed really to help you have these conversations with the doctor, as well as anybody that you want to include as a carer that's possibly giving it. But we heard from a lot of families, and this was really a lot of work that was done by Gabi and Jayetta at Deep Connections, where they didn't hear about rescue meds, right, from their doctor, or they didn't know about them. They had a hard time getting prescribed them or getting them covered. They didn't know that there were times that they might use a second rescue med, right? So there were times where we would give 20 milligrams of Diastat, which was the maximal dose for her, and then give her an extra 10. And what we do know, and I'm a neuroscientist too, and have my PhD and studied this for a long time. What we do know is that there are 3 instances where seizures can cause brain damage. One is what you've all heard, the convulsive seizure that lasts longer than 5 minutes. The other is a non-convulsive seizure, and where the seizure isn't stopping, or it's back to back to back non-convulsive, maybe twitching, maybe just staring, where you're not getting a real clear break. And we don't know scientifically how long that can go before the brain damage kicks in. Some people will say 30 minutes. Some people will say, no, don't wait that long. We would never wait that long. We would go, at the beginning of the seizure into 10 minutes. And the other is seizures clustering, where the seizures are back to back to back. And I'm of the generation, and I hope this isn't still happening today, but I know it is because I talk to families where my daughter had way too many prolonged seizures that we never intervened on because we didn't know any better. And those were absolutely 100% damaging her brain, damaging her ability to remember, damaging her ability to, to develop. And so, you really don't want to let seizures just go on and on and on, because they are going to have a long-term impact. A single seizure by itself, that wraps up on its own, is not thought to cause this major brain damage. But seizure after seizure after seizure, or all of them together, or really long ones, can really cause a lot of damage. Jen, go ahead.
I was just going to say there are 2 questions that I thought we should address before we move on. The first one, I guess, Ann Berg. Hi, Ann. How do you deal with conflicting plans, yours versus the school's? So since I had mentioned the school's I'll take that question. And the school's plan is my plan, and that's how that goes. I mean, so that's why that's a really important question, though, because I think that's why it's really imperative that you discuss this with your child's neurologist and make it a plan that the two of you have come up with together. Because yes, sometimes the schools aren't going to listen to the parents, just the parents, because I'm just the mom, but they will listen to the doctor. And certainly with our doctor, we've discussed the school plan with her, and it was really based on what I think I drove that a lot more than the doctor did, and the doctor she was able to just kind of sign off on that. So I think it's really important that if the school is deciding to have their own plan, that you speak up or call me because I'll help you speak up. I think it's really something that you need to focus on.
And at the end of the day, a seizure emergency plan, right? The thing that you would do at home, right? If there was an emergency, or the thing that you would do in the store, should be the exact same emergency intervention that happens anywhere, right? The threshold for administering something to prevent it from getting worse, right? Whether it's a VNS swipe or a rescue med, the threshold for giving rescue meds for status or for clusters, and then what to do after that or when to call the emergency room, that should all be determined with your expert physician, neurologist who knows what they're talking about. And that should be what everybody follows, whether you're at home or whether you're at school. Now, schools might have a policy of who administers it, or how they do it, and so there might be some extra steps in there, but the actual emergency plan of this is what happened, this is bad, this is a seizure emergency, I've talked to my doctor, we agree this is when a seizure or a group of seizures becomes an emergency, should be agnostic to where you're located. There might be more steps for sure, and you do have to work with the school on the policy, but the school shouldn't be dictating at all, oh, well, it didn't go 30 minutes, so I'm not giving a rescue, because they don't know the latest on research, and they're certainly not designed to prescribe. So that's a great question. There's another question. I'll just go ahead and take it here, Jen. We definitely want to get to Natalie and Gabi here as well. But how much is the term DEE currently recognized, utilized in the medical emergency areas? And that's a great question. Thanks, Karen. It's not. It's not. In the research world, people like Dr. Berg, who's on this webinar, it is, and experts, really just experts, it's really taking root. It's spreading amongst neurologists. I think they know about it. And it's an important designation, but I'm not entirely sure that you can go into an ER and say developmental epileptic encephalopathy, or even just epileptic encephalopathy, and have them know what that means. And I certainly know that it hasn't traversed into the insurance payer world where you get, coverage for epileptic encephalopathy. Intractable epilepsy with intellectual disability is still a phrase I always add in because that seems to be universally understood by schools, at least in the States, by schools, by emergency personnel, and also by researchers and physicians in general. So it's always good to include that, and then include what the DEE is, and you can certainly include the term DEE to educate them, but it is really not broadly known. And even when I say Lennox-Gastaut Syndrome to paramedics and emergency room personnel, they have no idea what I'm talking about. I still have to say intractable epilepsy, or uncontrolled seizures with intellectual disability. So, and then they will often ask, well, has she had this since birth? And so I would always kind of include that in the diagnosis. Seizure onsetted to intellectual disability started at age 30. So great questions. So let's go ahead, Gabi.
I was just going to say, and people, if you're working in the background and you have questions about actually filling out in practice, please, put those questions into the Q&A or chat so that we can engage with you and to help you figure out how to best use this form.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. So Gabi, let's go ahead with you now. Introduce yourself. I think everyone knows you, but go ahead and introduce yourself and Elliot. And what were your thoughts on the seizure emergency plan as you filled it out?
Yeah, thanks so much, Tracy. So as I mentioned at the top, I'm Gabi Conacher, president of Wishes for Elliot and co-founder of the Deep Connections Project. And I am the mother to Elliot, who is 7.5 and has very severe epilepsy and the comorbidities that come with it. You know, he's definitely a DEE, which is really that he has, you know, really severe intractable epilepsy and these many things that come along with it, including developmental delays. And so for us, you know, in the beginning, we used to be a little bit more open to having other people help with caregiving as long as they got, you know, the basics. But Elliot has become more and more complex over the years that basically he's almost never alone in the house, or he's never with someone else other than his dad or I. And so we've always just kind of had it in our heads and we've never really written it down. And it's a lot of that kind of gut feeling. It's like, do we do it? Do we see, like, wait and see what happens? And a lot of Elliot's seizures, not all, but some of them can be very subtle, right? So it's just like this little tremor in his hand. And if somebody doesn't see it and it's been going for 10 minutes and then they see it and it's, you know, been a minute. So we're always really stressed out about that. So what struck me when filling this out was that this is a great tool to use to educate people who spend time with your child, right? So that it's not just to like have it hanging in the kitchen or in their backpack or whatever, but it's like really walking through it with people, because I think then you can get into the granularity of it and say, you know, well, this is what it looks like. And this is, you know, just to have it be a conversation starter. Because I feel like it's really hard to just hand over a piece of paper to somebody and then expect them to be able to handle an emergency. So I love it being a tool to use with friends who might be around, family members who are willing to take an active role. And, you know, I'm thinking more and more about what happens if something happens to one of us and we're not around. And it's also a great conversation starter, frankly, for your co-parent, if you have one, so that you can try to get on the same page and really think about, you know, what the plans are. And frankly, a great conversation starter for your neurologist, because, you know, I have a fantastic neurologist. He is world renowned, but I don't think he's ever talked about seizure action plans. And so I will take this and I will bring it to him and I will say, we've only ever used diastat. And, you know, that's hard. You got to pull down the pants. You got to lube it up. You got to do, you know, and when you're in an emergency, you want to be doing something quick and as fast as you can get it in there. And so really thinking about some of this with our neurologist is high on my list. So.
Yeah, I love that about this document too. I think the light gray text areas that, you know, suggest things would have been so helpful for me. Oh, wait, there's more than one option of rescue med. Wait, I need an emergency plan. Why do I need an emergency plan? I mean, I can't tell you how many times we took Savannah's emergency plan that we just on our own thought we had to write down because we were calling the paramedics so often, and handed it to the doctor, to the paramedics, and then handed it to the emergency department people when we went there, because they would ask me the same questions. I just handed to them, here's her diagnosis, here's her allergies, here's her current weight. So it really can be a great conversation starter with the neurologist and for yourself to be like, oh, these are some questions that I had. And then I just want to touch on something you said about a subtle seizure, because you're right. I mean, so many times we were in the emergency room one time and the doctor's like, you know, she doesn't really look like she's in status, and she's sitting there, you know, going like this. And he'd be like, hey, Savannah. And, you know, 2 minutes after he called her, she could kind of like turn her head. She's like responsive. And I'm like, this has been going on for an hour. You either get her at a van or I'm leaving here and I'm going to go give it to her in the parking lot. Like, you give her more, because we know that intervening, the longer the seizure goes, or the status or the clusters, the harder they are going to be to stop. Like, we know that. And so you don't want to let this go on. The longest she ever seized was 4 days, because we had no idea that this was status. We just didn't know. We were brand new parents. And so, but the one in the hour for an hour in the emergency department was ridiculous. He just wouldn't believe that this was, you know, a non-convulsive status or a grouping of clusters that were not breaking apart. So it's really frustrating. So please, if you have any questions, please definitely type them in the chat box or in the Q&A. I don't have my Q&A open. We don't have anything in the Q&A.
We're watching, nothing right now active, so maybe we can hear from Natalie.
And then Natalie, we would love to hear from you now. So introduce yourself and tell us what you thought of when you were filling out the seizure emergency plan.
Yeah, so I'm Natalie Gilmore, and we are also part of the DEE community. We have a 19-year-old daughter with intractable epilepsy, and it started when she was 6 months old. I would say, so clustering seems to be more recently what our problem is, and that out of the blue sort of started when she was 13 and she started getting her period. And like, I did not know anything about clustering seizures. I thought seizures were bad enough and multiple types of seizures were bad enough. And then to know that they could all bundle together, and that was when you were going to be also using rescue meds. So this is super helpful. We too have a lot of caregivers that come into our home and help care for her. So, you know, we have been guilty of, I have verbalized plans with them, but I have not really formally kind of written down on the paper. So, you know, I think that this whole series has been amazing and super appreciative to both foundations for putting it on and educating, you know, the community at large. I think one thing that sort of I wondered about, but we've already sort of answered, was what do you sort of write down with the diagnosis? But Tracy, you just kind of answered that. You know, do you put, you know, just said maybe not putting Lennox-Gastaut Syndrome if that's what you have, because, or Dravet or whatever, because so few EMTs sort of know about that. So maybe is it better to just kind of describe your seizure types and, you know, the normal frequency? That's sort of the best thing that we should probably be doing.
Yeah, we would always put, you know, intractable epilepsy with intellectual disability first, and then Lennox-Gastaut syndrome, because they have, you know, they have their little medical devices. They can look it up, right? You know, and then we would include, you know, this is what no normal seizure looks like. And, you know, there are, I mean, we were, you know, we're kind of quote unquote lucky in a way, because that was really all she had. But there are other people who have, oh, in addition to this, we've got diabetes. And in addition to that, so we have, you know, GI issues. In addition to this, we have liver issues. Like, and so, you know, hopefully the form will help you, you know, for all the room that you need. I think the hardest thing that I noticed, you know, just in going through this whole series, the absolute hardest part of filling out the seizure emergency plan was knowing what the threshold was. You know, what is a cluster of seizures in your kid? We know a cluster of seizures is, you know, seizure after seizure after seizure without really enough of a break. You know, but what is enough of a break, and how many seizures, you know, is too many? If my kid's baseline is, you know, 2 to 3 tonic-clonics between midnight and 6 a.m., what if she has 4?
Mm-hmm.
You know, I mean, is that, are we clustered now? You know, what about status, right? Like, okay, so we know definitively if they go into convulsive status and they're jerking and that goes 5 minutes, we can give a rescue. But what about non-convulsive status? What about these merges of, you know, seizure types? Like, so what's the threshold? And I think what we heard over and over from Dr. Worrell to Dr. Berg to every caregiver that's spoken, including all of you, was that it's based on experience of what's going to happen next, right? I knew that if we woke up and she had a tonic-clonic after waking, this is horrible. Okay, we're now on alert for status. Right? And I knew she was going to have a bad day. And I also knew that she woke up and she was doing, you know, these myoclonics, these twitches and things that we're now on alert, right? And maybe now once you're on alert, things are out of the norm now. Maybe you can intervene with, like, you know, a preventative before the status or the major cluster happens. But what's going to happen next, right? You know, we had one mom who's like, well, my kid usually has, you know, 4 tonic-clonics a day, but now he's now had 10 at this point, but they've all been spaced, you know, an hour or 2 hours apart. Is that bad? And it's like, well, you know, I mean, I think that's really hard on the brain, first of all. And so you want to be thinking, what is it hard on the brain? But you also want to be thinking about, like, how are they going to recover from this? I mean, how are you going to, is it going to take them 3 days to recover from 10 tonic-clonics? Then you want to intervene sooner next time. But on the flip, you also have to think about giving them these meds. Like I know when I give Diastat, she's going to be out for like 3 or 4 hours now, and I'm not going to work, and she's not going to school, and you know, and some people can't do take benzos for different reasons, and so you know, and so the hardest, and that's really what you want to talk to your doctor about. But it's all going to come down to what's kind of the normal range. It's of course it's not going to be one number; it's going to be a range. But what's a normal range of seizures in terms of how frequent they are, how long they last, and how strong they are. This is always going to come down to frequency, duration, and intensity, you know, and then what's out of the norm where it's like, no, this is going to end badly. And then what are the risks of giving a rescue, and then what are the benefits? Well, we want to protect their brain, we want to stop it, but we also, you know, if they just don't tolerate benzos, if it's going to ruin their entire life, I mean, maybe you know, have other strategies in place. So
Yeah. Oh,
Jen,
go ahead.
go ahead. Oh, sorry, Gabi.
Oh, no, it's good. I just wanted to share. So Kathy, thanks for your comment about having, you said that you've got this up to date and hanging in your son's room, and that you called the paramedics so much that they knew everything about him. But, you know, it gave you the assurance that the meds could be up to date and you wouldn't have to think about that in a crisis. So we're really glad that that's been a useful tool for you. We will learn from you. Thank you. I just wanted to mention a few other things that came up that I was thinking about. You know, doing all of these rescue meds interviews, we heard from so many people with so many different experiences, and it broke my heart. One person who said, you know, we were prescribed Diastat 10 years ago, and it doesn't work. And that there's never been able to get something else that works because, you know, the neurologist does not bring it up with them. And, you know, and they live in a more rural area, so they're not, you know, seeing top docs out there. But, you know, hopefully this can be a way for starting that conversation and saying, we need something that works. I need to know what to do if I give this rescue med and 10 minutes later they're clustering again. I need to know what to do. You know, what's my next option? You know, for us also, Tracy, the goal was stay out of the hospital. Every time we get in there, we get a secondary infection. It means that it's at least a 3-week stay. It's like terrible for everybody, you know, and our little one, like you said, just throw her to the grandparents. And so, yeah. And then one other thought about the I-SEP that came to mind is maybe at the bottom also writing where it says neurologist, saying that it's developed in conjunction with a neurologist. So it kind of like helps, you know, people see that it's not just us scribbling it out. Not that we don't, you know, we wouldn't be the experts, like you said, Jen, we're just mom, you know, it's like,
Just
Right.
right. But like that, because, you know, there were also a lot of people who talked about inpatient, that they had a lot of trouble trying to get people to listen to them.
Listen to them. Yeah.
Yeah.
We definitely, you know, had on ours. So following sort of what Kathy said in her comment, we always wrote down her actual medication schedule, and we used her seizure emergency plan, not only to, you know, give it to a paramedic so that they can have it, but, and not only when we went to the hospital, like the hospital would be like, all right, what meds is she on and what time does she get them? And we just like, here's this piece of paper. But we also used it to put together her little pill box every week. So we were just lazy. Like we just used the same thing for every day. Pull that out, one piece of paper. And we just went into a little more detail about how she got the meds.
Mm-hmm.
And then, you know, it's you're absolutely right. It's like, you know, trying to keep out of the emergency room is really important for some people. And if you're not comfortable with that, I mean, it took us a while to work up to that, right? To get to that comfortable level, because it is scary giving these meds. And we have just, we're going to wrap up here in 1 minute, but just a couple things. One, Anne, thank you for your comment about going and getting to know your local your paramedics, your emergency squad before an emergency. That's a great idea. We knew them all by first name. They knew us by first name. And then, so that's a great comment to do it in a non-emergency situation. Karen also commented, what are the suggestions for when the hospital wants to give meds on their schedule rather than the child? We always bring, you know, this is kind of getting beyond the emergency piece of it, but we always bring our meds with us and we just give the meds And it's, you know, we take the approach of it's better to ask for forgiveness than permission when it comes to that, because shift change 2 hours late on the meds is just not acceptable with us. So, but there's other people, you know, that have different, you know, ideas about how to do that. I just want to say that, you know, we are all paving the way for the next generation of DE people that are coming up, parents and caregivers and loved ones, because this attention and emphasis on seizure emergency plans and action plans is new. It's totally new. I mean, they've been around forever and people have been, you know, using life hacks for them, but it's becoming more standard about what do you ask and how do you do it. So, you know, if you feel like you need one of these for your loved one, I mean, I would encourage you to write one up. We learned from Ann Berg's talk that everybody, that so many DE families are going to experience emergencies at some point. So having it written down, having the conversation of what really does constitute an emergency with seizures with your doctor, getting them to agree and sign off on this. And then making sure that, you know, it's transferable and yet it's one more thing that we as caregivers have to do ourselves. It'd be great if like the world just did this for us, but I think we are paving the way on something that's relatively new. And just locking in what to do in an emergency will then allow us to take the next bigger step of what a seizure action plan is. So, you know, it really just comes down to you. If you have any questions at all, you can email myself or Gabby. I'll type in my email in the box there. Please watch the last, you know, the 4-part series. You'll learn a ton. This is really important. Time is brain, as we have heard Dr. Berg say many times, and letting these seizures just go unchecked, especially in the really young kids as their development is so precious, is really damaging. So, but please ask us. And you know, again, we just want to thank everybody who was a part of this, all of our speakers, deep connections for partnering with LGS Foundation on this, and for our partners who helped to sponsor this, Neurelis and UCB, thank you. And please do not hesitate to go to our website or email me or Gabi if you have any questions. And thank you to our panelists today for joining us. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much. And for people who are interested, I did put the link to all of the previous webinars in the chat box if you're interested in listening to the rest of the series 1, 2, and 3, which Tracy did an overview of. And I mean, they're so revealing and so powerful, you know. And I think one big thing to take away from this also is that parents should trust themselves, right? We know our kids best. We have lived it, we see it, and to trust that when, you know, we're in the midst of crisis. So anyway, just wanted to empower. Also, just like quickly want to share that Deep Connections is working on a number of webinars that are coming up, no dates yet, but we have one where we're going to be talking about curing the epilepsies, which is sets benchmarks for the next 10 years about how to work on improving epilepsy treatments. And so we'll be presenting on that a little bit and hoping that parents and families get involved. We'll have one on the ABCs of clinical trials readiness, so families can better understand what clinical trials are, what roles they can play, how they can be prepared to contribute. We're doing a series on SUDEP. We've heard a lot of feedback from people that they want to hear more about SUDEP. So we're working on a series that we're doing that's going to talk about what do we know, what's the science, and the practice around prevention, what we know about prevention, and just sharing experiences in that space. And we're also working on a series that's going to be longer term on about being prepared. And this is a great, you know, this definitely will be filed under there as well. But it's about kind of getting all of your ducks in a row. As Tracy mentioned, we're going to be doing more to help families get things, you know, like the different kinds of pieces in place if something happened to you, so that other people can help care for your child. So, you know, we have an incredible story of a single mom who got COVID and was intubated and who was unable to care for her child on the spot. And she has a brilliant book that goes with her child. And that book taught everybody how to take care of her. And luckily she recovered. And so it's going to be with mom and her mother who helped care for a child and the nurse. So really to get the whole view of that experience. So anyway, again, as Tracy said, we want to thank our sponsors for this series, UCB and Neurelis, and we're so thrilled that so many of you have written to us that this has been a really helpful series. It's been very helpful for me, I know. And please do be in touch if you have questions, and all of these will be up, this website, in addition to all the others, will be up on our websites on LGS Foundation, as well as Deep Connections in the next few days. So thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Gabby.
Thanks to you all. Thanks, Tracy, for running the show.
Tracy.